today's presentation, we're going to be looking at Robertson Owen and Richard Branson, and as pioneers of management. We'll be covering Owen's management approaches and how they influence today's management practices, and we'll be looking at Branson's management approaches and how they too influence today's management practice, and then compare the context of time and the business environment that they worked in, and see how they affected their approaches.
Right, we're going to start with Robert Owen. Robert Owen was described as having practiced enlightened management, and this is because of the humanistic approach he took with managing his factory. He first worked in Manchester, which he described as an irrational society, and this was due to because it was so industrialized, people had lacked unity and communication, especially between different classes. He then moved on to New Lanark, where he tried out some different methods in order to preserve the community feel that he noticed in New Lanark, and as well as to enhance productivity. It's these methods that made Robert Owen so renowned for his enlightened management, and a success both back then and as an example for us today. Some of the changes that he made at New Lanark was he reduced working hours from 13 to 10 hours a day. He also made sure that benefits were high, so that even if wages were relatively low for the time, they were still compensated for by benefits such as medical services. And he also consistently paid his workers, which made them loyal to him. And one significant change that he also made was that he refused to accept workers under the age of 10, because he recognized that education was crucial to a child's development at the time. And in spite of the humanistic approaches, Robert Owen was still very rigid in some of the disciplinary actions that he took, and he often used negative enforcement, such as the silence monitor, which you can see in this photo. The silence monitor is a four-sided cube, each side of the cube representing a certain standard or quality of work, and each one would be hung over each worker's station. He also enforced some discipline outside of the factory, which included random searches and cleanliness inspections of the workers' houses. He was very rigid in terms of how people behaved, both inside the factory and out. And while this was considered a bit tough, he was still very fair in that workers could report any unjust treatment that they found at the factory. And this very rigid discipline is an example of Theory X management, where Theory X assumes that workers tend to be lazy and need constant surveillance and to be constantly monitored and motivated in order to stay on task. And while this seemed unconventional, profits were still high enough to cover the losses from the American embargo, which lasted for 4 months, and he continued to pay his workers during that time, and he subsidized education for children, and there was significant dividends when he retired.
Now we're going to look at the influence that Robert Owen has on management practice today. Owen has been an influential figure for management thinking all over the world during his time and now in the 21st century. As a social reformer, he believed that good education, working conditions and support should be held above profit making. Owen managed to cater to the formations of the Maslow hierarchy theory of needs, providing motivation to his staff. His main contributions to management are respecting and appreciating an employee's contribution to the business, the introduction of better working conditions, the provision of basic needs for workers, an increase in the minimum wage, and a reduction of long working hours. Some UK examples of companies that have been influenced by the cooperative movement that Owen started include food retail cooperatives such as the Cooperative Group, which is one of the world's largest consumer-owned businesses. This group includes a cooperative bank and funeral services. The business runs for the benefit of its members, being the consumers, who are also involved in decision-making and share profits of the business. The same can be said for the massive retail company, John Lewis. Lessons that can be learned from Robert Owen. If management focuses on educating and supporting people and think more about the welfare and happiness of their employees, then increased productivity may result, as well as higher profits. Owen's practice has shaped theory today and could be implemented in all areas of management by providing education and training whilst caring more about the needs and happiness of their workers.
Now moving on to Richard Branson. He's the founder of Virgin Group, which is a group of over 200 companies in a variety of industries, including banking, digital TV and rail travel. And what's particularly amazing about his achievements is that he's been successful in industries that were already considered to be very highly competitive before he even entered the industry. His style can be applied to many theories. Firstly, I'd like to talk about Porter's generic strategies. There are 4 generic strategies outlined by Porter, and he recommends focusing entirely on one in order to gain the highest competitive advantage, which in Richard Branson's case is differentiation. What Richard Branson looks to do is find an industry which he feels the competition's become complacent and where he feels he could provide a better service himself. So he'll enter the industry and attempt to differentiate his company simply by being the best in terms of customer service. This quote expresses Branson's opinion on the management of people and how he thinks they should be treated. And as you can see, he gives a lot of focus on treating his employees well in order to be successful. This links into the theories X and theory Y, which are all about the management perceptions of the employees and how they act on those perceptions. So in the case of Richard Branson, he's very much on the theory Y side of things, where he gives his employees a lot of responsibility and freedom, which allows them to be creative and ultimately just allows them to get the most out of them. This actually links to a resource-based theory, which is all to do with companies utilising the internal resources in order to gain an advantage over the other companies. And as I've mentioned before, it's the key resource for Richard Branson is his employees. What he looks to do is find individuals that are talented, but then allow them to express their talent by not only giving them that responsibility and freedom, but also giving them a voice in how the company's run. And this quote explains in his words his views on that.
So now we're going to look at the Branson's influence on modern management. Following what Carl said, on the matrix of responsible leadership orientations, which Branson would fit in as an idealist. And this means that his breadth of constituent group focus is quite narrow, so he won't focus on like a large group of shareholders, but he has a narrow aim to it. But he also got a high degree of accountability towards others, and this means that he values the needs of non-business stakeholders and believes them legitimate and morally relevant. And he's also sceptical of market and government abilities to provide socially optimum outcomes, where the opposite would be you'd have the traditional economist where they focus on profit maximising and rely on the taxes which go to the government to then sort out the social, bring about a socially desirable outcome. This links in today with the principle of siteidealist.org, which is a job site which focuses specifically on responsible management and leadership positions. And it now has over 1 million registered users, which just shows the popularity of this type of work and management now. We've also got a quote here from Siki Prahalad, who was a Harvard graduate who got a doctorate there and went on to become a professor. And he saw in the 2 years of financial crisis, new debate about management roles and what was a good management roles to see success. And he went on to teach in his MBAs and the executive education courses. He'd included in them his perspective on how they can become responsible managers. That was what he believed was the way forwards. Then we move on to the European Foundation for Management Development, EFMD, and then the accreditation body of quality management. They go to places like education, academic and corporate organisations. And they've got over 800 members in 18 countries. It shows just how widespread this is and how global it is. They work with like the UN Global Contact, Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative, and the Business and Society Gateway. And their aim is to try and get more, develop more responsible managers through the education course. It's again what they see as the way forward, following on from the success of people like Richard Branson.
I'm going to talk about how the context of time and business environment affected the management approaches. As we can clearly see, they operate in very different contexts of times. Robert Owen was affected by the Industrial Revolution, which began in the 1770s in England, and we saw the introduction of new manufacturing processes. So he had to be dynamic in order to adapt for these changes and remain competitive. Now Richard Branson operates in an increasingly globalized world where there is fierce competition, and it's essential to focus on differentiation and innovation. Now, one of Robert Owen's approaches was combining mechanical manufacturing systems and human capital to boost productivity. But he had a main problem, the low levels of factory work experience. And this was because during the 1770s, we saw this huge wave of migration from rural to urban areas. So these workers didn't have enough manufacturing experience. Now, his approach to solve this problem was introducing new organization and control systems to establish some discipline. But the root problem still remained, which was the low levels of education and regulation in the labor sector. Now, Owen believed that education could help enhance standards of living of society, but also boost economic development. And one of his approaches to improve the standards of living of society is quoted here. In 1815, he persuaded allies in Parliament and made it illegal for children under 10 to work in mills. Now, for Branson, obviously, he doesn't have to deal with these problems because nowadays these kind of manufacturing practices are illegal. As I mentioned before, he focuses on innovation and diversification. Indeed, he presides a conglomerate of over 400 operations in 34 countries. He also believes in the importance of employees and he tries to motivate them, but with different management styles than Owen, because he has, for example, access to a highly educated workforce, so he can focus on delegation and empowerment. He also believes in approaches to improve the standards of living of society, but he focuses in the challenges which exist nowadays, such as climate change. He's a billionaire philanthropist, and for example, in 2007, he launched the Green Fund to support renewable energy investments.
The fact that despite the gap in years of when Owen and Branson were active in the business, is so vast, they still share many similar characteristics in their style of management and the fact that they were morally aware of the social needs of the time. Is what we think makes the study of responsible leaders so important today, as the management styles are constantly evolving and adapting to different challenges which we face. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane.
Okay, thank you very much.